Welcome back to The Beat. We are live for you in Washington, and we've been covering a lot of different stories, but this one is a doozy, and it touches on a topic we were actually just visiting earlier in this week. The New York Times crossing a story late today that is one of those kind of pieces that makes you thankful for independent journalism that the New York Times does. This wasn't just a one-off or a quick thought. The headline here, how Bill Barr's quest to find flaws in the Russia inquiry unraveled, is a detailed and masterful account based on international reporting, many weeks of digging into what really went down. They found internal dissent and ethical disputes inside the handpicked team that was supposed to support what really sound like deep state conspiracy theories that Trump got Barr to waste the DOJ's time on. Over a dozen current and former officials spoke on the record. We're talking about people who did the work, many behind the scenes, some affiliated with the Republican Party. And what comes through in this independent account is that Barr was basically a kind of a Breitbart Reddit conspiracy theorist who abused his power, no allegation of a crime, but abused his power and may have crossed ethical lines to press a politicized, handpicked Trumpy prosecutor, Mr. Durham, to prove a conspiracy theory that they could not prove. For example, it reports how Barr said at the beginning of the probe, rather than following the facts where they lead, and by the way, you find bad facts about people inside the DOJ, great, bust them. But they started with this faulty premise and conspiracy theory that Barr believed the CIA and British spies and what he suspected as the NSA's friends somehow concocted a scheme to start the Russia investigation because they wanted to target the Trump campaign. Now, let me tell you something. If you could prove that, that would be a big deal. And if you followed evidence and ended up finding out that, it would be a big deal, and we would report on it. But you don't start a complex international probe with some unfounded theory and then demand that a prosecutor go get into people's lives to prove it. And here's the thing about Mr. Durham, who I will say previously did have a long record of doing all kinds of reasonable probes, but who, as we reported, looked increasingly unhinged and political in this role. Even Mr. Durham, with his assorted powers, and the Biden administration did not interfere when he kept working after the transition of power, he didn't find any evidence to support any of that. Reading from the New York Times piece, Barr and Durham traveled abroad together to press British and Italian officials to reveal everything their agencies had gleaned about the Trump campaign and related to the U.S. Both allied governments denied they'd done any such thing. This weird conspiracy theory that these two men apparently were desperate to prove. Other former U.S. officials told the New York Times that British intelligence officials expressed indignation to their allies, our U.S. counterparts, about this accusation in the first place. The article also reports that Durham used Russian intelligence memos trying to, again, launder his deep state conspiracy theories. If you're thinking, okay, Ari, that's like a lot of stuff, those are just a couple pieces of an exhaustive report. We have experts to get into both the law and what was the apparently MAGA politics under all of this. Former federal prosecutor John Flannery and Che Komanduri is with us riding shotgun. It is no longer Che Day. John, welcome back.
Good to be here.
Good to have you. Let's start with this.
Okay.
Does a fair and valid investigation usually begin with an attorney general phoning in the outcome he wants?
Well, no, it doesn't. Well, let's say no honest one begins
No
that
honest
way.
one, right? So if this is dishonest, what was Mr. Barr up to? And does it matter years later, people busy, people moving on, does it matter that he is getting aired out in the New York Times today?
Well, it's very interesting because you and I had a moment when the memo by Barr went out involving the Mueller investigation, and I called it a contract for the president to bury that. It was after that that they assigned Durham basically to find how the Russian investigation was all made up, and then they mimicked all the things that they were supposedly investigating.
Mm-hmm.
So they actually did the misconduct that they were looking at the FBI and others to see if they did.
Right.
And
You're saying, I mean, there's an animal farm quality.
Yeah, yes.
That what everyone thinks of Bob Mueller, he was basically always a registered Republican who had a lot of esteem. And when he did the report, The only thing that I think he got a lot of public flack for was after indicting a lot of Trump aides, he didn't make a forceful case against Donald Trump, which kind of speaks to his fairness, whether one agrees with it or not.
Right. Well,
and then Barr comes around here and says, let me discredit all of this. And your point is that was wrong. And then in court, they failed. I mean, they couldn't prove any of this.
They couldn't prove it. And there is a parallel with the Mueller investigation as to Barr's conduct, because when the Inspector General did his investigation and said that there was some problems but nothing serious, Barr came out and said, oh, that vindicates us. That shows that there was. So he exaggerated in both cases. So an innocent person was tried. But on top of it, they found evidence, they thought, of financial bad dealings by Trump from Italian sources, and they buried that. So they buried something that might have disclosed misconduct by Trump, and they were hyping other stuff. Now, had we not...
Let me pause you there.
Yes.
The Times talks to a lot of people. This is quite a story.
It is.
They describe this as fundamentally wrong, meaning incorrect, and unethical.
Absolutely.
Do you agree with that, and do you think any of it passed a further line?
Well, yes, I do, because we're talking about using grand juries and people. And so, yes, it's unethical. What is unethical is sometimes not illegal, but all the different papers that were filed and so forth, somebody's going to have to look at that and find it out. Now, Danahy was his second in control, and she was like the canary in the cave. When she left, it was clear that it had to do with the ethics and that Durham was doing what he was told to do, not what the facts and the law justified.
Yeah, you're reminding us in the article refers to this, we reported at the time, that Durham then picked someone to be his deputy, his number 2.
Yes.
And she left in apparent protest, but according to secrecy, we didn't know exactly why. And you're saying this shows again that Trump got Barr to do what many others wouldn't, and Barr got Durham to do it. And then lo and behold, the people working most closely with him said, no, you're unethical. I can't be a party to this. Well, so you hang with me, John.
Okay.
That's the law.
Here. That's the law. Yes.
Now I go to Che on. Now, John handled the law. Che, do you know what you're going to handle?
The politics, I assume?
Close. The political BS. They also tried and failed, but we just learned this today in the Times, to push out a report to help Trump in the 2020 election. Sometimes the news is what happens. Sometimes what doesn't happen, by definition, doesn't make the news. It's a secret. This is important tonight. I want viewers to really listen to this. This is bad for Barr. Quote, by summer 2020, with Election Day approaching, Mr. Barr pressed Mr. Durham to draft a potential interim report. Quote, interim report, whatever they think that means, centered on the Clinton campaign and FBI gullibility or willful blindness. I'm curious, Che, how you read that. It didn't happen, so it either hit Durham's limit or his own people were like, we're not doing that. And I don't know about you, Che, but it seems familiar to me that in the summer of 2020, who was obsessed with talking about Hillary Clinton still?
Yeah, but I think that what's interesting is that this seems to go beyond just political considerations. As you point out, in summer 2020, Hillary Clinton really wasn't on the ballot. That wasn't something anybody was discussing. But what was going on, I believe, is that Donald Trump's own personal psychology was infecting the people around him. What Donald Trump believes is that anything that he believes or wants to happen can happen just by the sheer force of him saying it. You know, he asked Brad Raffensperger to manufacture votes in Georgia, very famously. He asked Barr and Durham to manufacture a finding in this supposedly legal probe. He wanted this to be manufactured at his will. That's his psychology. That's how Donald Trump thinks about the world. And one of the things that's very clear about Trump and Trump world is the longer you spend time there, the more like Donald Trump you become. And what Barr and Durham did, despite their background in establishment politics, law, and ethics, they just became like Donald Trump because they just spent so much time around him. He infected them.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, that's why I mentioned the Clinton thing is vintage Trump. Other people would not really think to do that. It suggests that got pretty far. There has to be legal and ethical reviews here. Again, I took pains to mention there's not an allegation of a crime, but certainly with oversight, Senate Judiciary, do they want to talk to Durham? Even in closed session, do they want to get into what the heck was going on and just how far Trump's tentacles reached through Barr to this Justice Department? All of this before he staged an attempted coup. I want to thank Che Komanduri. I want to thank John Flannery. When we come back, we are doing